Welcome everyone. So today's workshop, the JAIA, we are going to show you how to build a retrieval augmented generation, or otherwise called RAG, enabled chatbot using AWS Bedrock along with JavaScript. So AWS Bedrock is essentially a service that allows developers to interface with foundation large language models, such as ones from Anthropic, ones from Llama. I think Amazon has a few. So let me just quickly share my screen and talk quickly about RAG. All right, so typically when you're talking to a large language model, that large language model has been trained on millions of documents, right? And one of the issues we may have with large language model is they have what's called general knowledge, right? So they'll know a bit about everything. But sometimes we want our large language model to have specific knowledge, so on specific topics, or maybe be an expert on information within your company. So maybe you have documents within your company that may not even be on the internet, and you want to be able to speak with your large language or prompt your large language model in a way that it can reference those documents. So retrieval augmented generation essentially enables this. So what it does is it allows you to utilize the capabilities of the LLM to reference documents that you would have provided it. And it can use that now as context, so that whenever you're prompting the model, it basically uses that context to give more relevant responses. All right. So typically, how it works is these documents are vectorized. All right. So we have something called a vectorizer that creates what we call embeddings. Essentially, sentences in your documents can be converted to a list of numbers. This essentially allows for easier searching of information. So whenever you're putting in a prompt, what happens is there's something that essentially matches your prompt with the relevant sections of the document. Once it finds a relevant section of the document, it can provide that now as context to the large language model so that you can get a more relevant response. So we're going to essentially use AWS Bedrock, which also uses something called Open Search, which is going to be our vector, so we'll call a vector store, which is going to store those embeddings of the documents. And we are going to use one of the foundation models to see if we can create a chatbot in JavaScript. So I have on with me Raheem Wilson. He'll be doing the front end side of things, but I'll take you through how to set it up on AWS. So the first thing you would do is essentially you'd want to create what's called an IAM user. If you go to IAM, I think I'm using an IAM user at the moment, so I don't think this has the ability to create one. Let's see. No, that's fine. Right, so the option is here to create a user. So you just enter the username and you can set the permissions. But essentially, you'd also want to check this if you want access to the console. And once you create the user, you're able to generate an access key. Right, so if you go to security credentials, you can generate access key. If you come here and just create access key, it will create an access key for you. So this will essentially allow for your JavaScript application to be able to utilize the services available in AWS. Now, after you create your user, you have to attach some policies to that user, some permissions essentially. So that user is able to access the services required to use Amazon Bedrock. So if you click on the user, come to permissions, you can essentially add all the permissions the user needs. Typically for Bedrock, you would need Bedrock full access. So you can click on add permission, click on add permissions. You can say attach policies directly, and then you just search for the one you want and you can add it, right? So if you wanted Bedrock, you can just type it in. I already have access to it, and you just click on it and then click next, and it will add that permission. I didn't add it before, but one permission that you may want to add as well is AWS Lambda. We're not going to use it for this particular tutorial, but it may come in handy for using AWS Bedrock. It's an option. So if to enable that option, you can simply just click on this, click next, and add permission. So now this user has access to Amazon Bedrock, S3, full access, Lambda. Also ensure to give it IAM access as well, because what's gonna happen is when you're creating what's called a knowledge base, and we're gonna talk about that soon, it's gonna require the ability to create a service account, which would essentially give that user the ability to utilize the Bedrock functionalities. So it needs access to IAM to be able to create that service account. You can also create an inline policy. So we already created one. If we look here, so it's essentially kind of like a JSON of the permissions that are allowed. Here we're allowing Bedrock and also Amazon OpenSearch serverless, right? We're allowing all of that. You could have added the Amazon OpenSearch serverless like this as well. So OpenSearch, OSS. I think one of these is supposed to be it. Amazon OpenSearch. Yeah, here it is. So you can add this as one of the policies. All right, so once you've added all of that, next thing you'd want to do is to create an S3 bucket. So the S3 buckets, remember I said with RAG, essentially the model is going to be using information from documents as context so that you can give you more relevant responses. So those documents need to be stored in an S3 bucket. There are other options for storage, but we're going to use a S3 bucket. So what you do is come here, create bucket, give it a bucket name. My suggestion is to click ACLs enabled and untick this just so that you don't have any issues. All right, untick block all public access and just click create bucket and it should be fine. I think it should still work if you had ticked this, but generally I found this option to be the least problematic. Anyways, so we've already created our bucket and I think we already have a document here. So this is a Faculty of Science and Technology handbook at the University of the West Indies. So I guess if we were essentially creating a chatbot for the University of the West Indies, this is a relevant document that you would want to be able to glean information from so that we can get relevant responses to students. So maybe someone is coming on a new student and essentially they want information, they can essentially talk to the chatbot and get the information from the handbook. So after we've created the bucket now, what we're gonna do is go to Bedrock, right? Amazon Bedrock. All right, so Amazon Bedrock, as I said, it allows you to utilize foundation models. So these are like your Llama models from Anthropic, like Claude. It doesn't have any OpenAI models, right? But it has Claude, which is a very good alternative actually to OpenAI. Some other options you have. So you have image to image, image to video, image to text. So you have multimodal models available in Amazon Bedrock as well. You can create agents. So yeah, there's a lot of functionality. But what we're gonna look at today is essentially we're going to create what's called a knowledge base, which is essentially going to be the knowledge base for our chatbot, right? This is what is going to interact with our document store, right? So that S3 bucket that have all the documents, that is going to take care of essentially vectorizing the document. So turning it into what we call embeddings. So these are just list of numbers. And then allowing for the search. So whenever a prompt is entered into the chatbot, it's going to utilize that search functionality so that it finds the most relevant parts of the document. So that can use that now as context for your chatbot to give more relevant responses. If we go to model catalog, you'll see all the models that are available, right? If you notice, I have access granted to a lot of these models. When you go on it for the first time, you won't see access granted. You see this available to request. So what you can do is just click here and click modify access. And if you click this, modify access, you can literally enable which models you want to have access to, right? So I already have access to the models that I plan to use today. So you can choose which models you want. So you have all the ones, the Llama ones right here. You have the Claude 3.7, 3.5. You have Claude 3.5 Sonnet. All of the Claude models are here. We have some Amazon Foundation models, but I think once you have Claude, you should be good. It's probably I'd say one of the top LLMs out there right now. And you have multimodal. So you have text and vision. So you have multimodal models. At the a text embedding model, right? So I would recommend this one. So you have Titan Text Embeddings V2. So enable that one as well. So you request access and it only takes a few minutes for access to be granted. So this is going to be responsible for essentially taking the documents, right? So the information from the PDF and then converting those to embeddings, which as I said, just a list of numbers. So that whatever is doing the searching can essentially find the relevant part of the document that you can use for the RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Cool. So once you've requested access, you come back here to model catalog. You should see access granted on those models. So we have access to Claude 3.7 Sonnet. That's I think the latest Claude model. So I have Claude 3.5, Claude 3.5 Sonnet. So yeah, we have some very impressive models here. We also have access to the Llama models, right? 70B instruct. You have the small ones if you want, I guess, faster. And a lot of these models are enabled with agents, functionalities, and all of that stuff. We even have I didn't even know what DeepSeek. Yeah, I have DeepSeek models as well. But these are the distilled. But as we've seen when we did the DeepSeek paper read, the distilled models are actually up there with some of the top models. So we have DeepSeek models as well. All right, so we already have this granted. So what we'll do now is create our knowledge base. So come here to create, I already have a knowledge base, but I'm gonna create another one just so you guys can see the process of creating a knowledge base. So as I said, the knowledge base is essentially what's gonna hold the information so that our chatbot can essentially query that knowledge base for a relevant document or piece of the document that's going to utilize as context to provide relevant responses to you. So we could create, what you want to choose is the option that says knowledge base with vector store, right? So it comes up with a knowledge base name. You can modify this name, but I usually just keep it the same. So this one is what, V20E. So we'll just remember that so we know that this is the one that we created a while ago. For this option, let it create the service role. So don't say use an existing, just create one. Let it create it. And you can leave the service role name, it's fine. Data source. So I'm using S3. You have other options. So you have a web crawler, so you could possibly crawl the web. You could crawl SharePoint, so like your Word documents, all that stuff, Confluence. But in this case, we have our documents in S3, so we're gonna choose S3. We can click next. All right. So data source location, we just said this AWS account, right? Because that's where we created the S3 bucket. So we click browse S3, and this is the S3 bucket that we had created. So we'll click choose, right? So it's gonna essentially use the documents from this S3 bucket as the document store for the RAG-enabled chatbot. For the parser, you can stick with the default option, so the Amazon Bedrock default parser. The parser is essentially what's going to go through the PDF and actually extract the words from the PDF. Our parsers that can process images as well, right? You have some other options you can change, like the chunking strategy. So this is basically what it does. It's going to split up the documents into chunks, right? So portions. And essentially when you're doing that prompt, that query for the relevant piece of the document, it's gonna be looking for that specific chunk that matches that prompt closely, or the closest that it's going to use as context essentially. Think of it this way. So so just imagine you have a document and you have a bunch of words in that document. So it's gonna split it up into chunks. So this might be one chunk, this might be one chunk, right? And it's gonna create embeddings of these chunks. So this goes into what's called a vector store. So consider the embeddings like a coordinate on a map, right? So this will have a list of numbers that represent the coordinates, so where this exists. This will have a list of numbers that represents the coordinates for where this exists in my vector store. So when I, as a user, ask a question, right? So I'm giving a prompt, right? Essentially, something is going to match my prompt to the embeddings in here to find the one that's closest. All right, so let's say it's find this as the closest one. All right, we know this matches to this piece of the document. It's gonna use this now as context to the LLM. So this could be Claude or whichever to output some response. So that's the basic gist of retrieval augmented. So for the chunking strategy, you can leave it as a default. We have other chunking strategies that may lead to better performance. Right. So click next. Now, the next thing you need to do is choose an embeddings model. So this is essentially thing that's going to convert these words into the coordinates that we talked about. So select model, and I'm going to choose this one, Titan Text Embeddings V2, right? And I'm going to click apply, right? Can leave this. They have options. You can change the vector size, but I'll leave the default options here. So it's asking if you want to create a new vector store. So you might already have a vector store. So you have options like Pinecone, Amazon Aura, MongoDB. Pinecone is a very popular vector store, but we'll just let it create a vector store. Right, so it's gonna use Amazon Open Search Serverless, right? So that's a vector store in Amazon. So this way you can have your whole entire stack on AWS instead of having to switch, have these multiple different things that you're paying for. You can have everything on AWS so that you just get one bill for the month, essentially. So go with that option now. And that's pretty much it, like literally. Once you select the data store, which is a S3 bucket, that's pretty much it. So this is basically going to be the knowledge base ID that you're going to need now. When you go into the JavaScript code, it's going to use this information as the knowledge base. So I'm going to click create knowledge base. This may take a little bit of time, like a few minutes. So wait. Luckily, we already have a knowledge base. So probably just going to use that in the interest of time. So if I go on knowledge bases, see, I already have a knowledge base here, right? So when knowledge base is created, it looks like this, right? So this is the knowledge base ID, so that it says it's available. When your knowledge base is created, you need to sync your data source, right? So where it says data source here, right? So you can have multiple data sources linked to the knowledge base. You can have multiple S3 buckets. So I have this one S3 bucket, right? So you just click this option here and then click sync, right? What this will do is essentially get the information from the documents, create the embeddings, store it in the vector store, right? So that's all sync does. I already synced the knowledge base, so that's fine. So it's good to go. And essentially that's it for creating a knowledge base. Now the question is now, how am I going to use this information? So I have the knowledge base name or the knowledge base ID. How am I going to use this now to essentially create my chatbot? Now, before you even get to the JavaScript portion of things, you can actually test out your model base. So you can select a model. So if the model had been enabled, we're going to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet. All right, we'll have several options here. We have version 2, version 1. Can try version 2. Oh no, use version. So use the ones that say on demand, right? So we're gonna use the ones that say on demand. So this one is on demand. So Claude 3.5 Sonnet. We'll click apply. And then there you can just chat with it. So you can say what courses are mandatory for computer science. So let's see if it's able to. Oh, see there. For a major in computer science, following courses are mandatory. Comp 1126, Comp 1127, Comp 1161, levels 2, 2140, 2171, 2190. Yeah, I can verify this is true because I did computer science at UA and this information is very accurate actually. That's pretty cool. So, all right, so clearly our knowledge base is working and Claude 3.5 seems to be really good. Question is now, how do we enable that in use the S3 K in JavaScript so that we can chat with it. Now, before I turn it over to Raheem, which will show us that section, I need to show you what you need to first of all record. So take a note of this. I don't think you need this. I think you just need the knowledge base name. Correct me if I'm wrong, Raheem. Just this knowledge base name, or
It's
do I
the
need the
ID.
ID?
It's the ID, yeah.
Or just the ID?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so just the ID
And the
and
key.
and the what?
Access key and
Oh
secret.
yeah. So you need the access key and secrets. I am